My greedy sister married my husband, hoping to take over his $400 million fortune. But just a few days later, he passed away unexpectedly. After the funeral, she confidently declared herself the heir to his wealth. However, when the lawyer read his will, what we discovered shocked everyone. My sister was left speechless by what he had written. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. My name is Audrey, and I need to tell you a story. It's a story I've held inside for a long time, and I think it's time to let it out. It's a story about family, about betrayal, and about how the truth can sometimes be more complicated and more painful than the lies we're told. It's not an easy story to tell, so please, bear with me. I had always been the quiet one. If my twin sister, Beatrice, was the sun, then I was the moon, only visible because of her reflected light. She was born with a fire inside her, a dazzling, confident energy that drew everyone into her orbit. When we were children, she was the one climbing the tallest trees, leading the neighborhood games, her laughter echoing down the street. I was the one on the porch swing with a book, watching, always watching. Our parents, well, they orbited her too. They didn't even try to hide their favoritism, it was just a simple, unchangeable fact of our household, like the squeaky third step on the staircase or the leaky faucet in the kitchen. Beatrice was their golden child, the one they bragged about to friends and relatives. Did you hear? Beatrice scored the winning goal in her soccer match, my father would boom over the phone. Beatrice made the honor roll again, of course, my mother would say at family gatherings, beaming. Whenever I came up in conversation, it was usually as a footnote. And Audrey's doing fine, too. She's a quiet one, our Audrey. My childhood health issues didn't help. While Beatrice was collecting sports trophies, I was collecting doctor's appointments. A bout of pneumonia one winter, severe asthma the next. It felt like my body was as quiet and fragile as my personality. My parents' concern always felt tinged with a faint, weary sigh of disappointment. I was the lesser twin, the one who couldn't keep up. I remember our 8th birthday so clearly, it feels like a movie I can replay in my mind. We had our usual shared party in the backyard, with a sheet cake that had both our names written in frosting, Beatrice's in bold, swirling pink and mine in a smaller, neater blue. When it was time for the big present, my father wheeled out Beatrice's first, a gleaming, 10-speed Schwinn bicycle. It was candy apple red, with silver tassels on the handlebars that shimmered in the sun. All the kids gasped. Beatrice let out a shriek of pure joy and hopped on, her blonde ponytail flying behind her as she zipped around the lawn, a perfect picture of a perfect daughter. Then, my mother came out of the house holding my gift. It was a large, leather-bound anthology of classic poems. It was a beautiful book, but in that moment, it felt like a consolation prize. "This is more your speed, Audrey," she'd said, patting my head. Her smile was kind, but her words felt like a cage. "You can read it inside while your sister plays." I looked at my father. He was watching Beatrice, his face alight with a look of pure, unadulterated pride. When his eyes finally flickered to me, holding my book, his smile was thin, almost an obligation. That was the moment I truly understood. I wasn't just different, in their eyes, I was a lesser version. A quieter, paler copy. It wasn't just birthdays. It was everything. I remember the 4th grade spelling bee. I had studied for weeks, memorizing lists of words until my eyes burned. I won for my class, and I was so proud I thought my heart would burst. I ran home, clutching my little blue ribbon. That same day, Beatrice had competed in the district-wide track meet. She came in 2nd place in the 50-yard dash. That evening, at the dinner table, my father stood up and made a toast. To Beatrice. 2nd place in the whole district. "We're so proud of you, champ." They took her out for ice cream to celebrate. My blue ribbon lay on the kitchen counter, unnoticed. When I finally pointed it out, my mother just said, "Oh, that's nice, dear. But it's just a Class B." My mother's favorite phrase, the one that became the soundtrack to my youth, was always delivered with a sharp edge of frustration. "Audrey, why can't you just try to be more like Beatrice? Put a smile on your face. You'd have an easier time if you did." I heard it so often that the sting eventually faded into a dull, permanent ache. I learned to live with it. I accepted my role. I was the observer, the side character in the vibrant story of my sister's life. I loved Beatrice, I truly did. As a child, I worshipped her. But it's a difficult thing to love someone who is a constant, living reminder of everything you are not. When the time came for college, it felt like a lifeline. Beatrice, naturally, was accepted into a prestigious university on the East Coast with a partial athletic scholarship. Her departure was a grand affair, with a huge going-away party and tearful goodbyes. My own college acceptance letter, to a smaller state school in Texas, was met with a simple, "Oh, that's nice, dear." For me, college wasn't just about getting a degree, it was a desperate bid for my own identity. It was a chance to go somewhere no one knew my name, let alone my sister's. I packed everything I owned into my beat-up, 10-year-old Ford Escort. It wasn't much. 2 boxes of books, a suitcase of clothes that all seemed to be in shades of gray and beige, and a churning mix of terror and exhilaration in my stomach. The day I left, my parents gave me a quick, perfunctory hug. Their minds were already on the care package they were putting together for Beatrice. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw them through the rearview mirror, standing on the porch, my father's arm around my mother's shoulder. They didn't wave. The drive to Dallas was a 16-hour marathon fueled by gas station coffee and the static-filled country music stations that faded in and out as I crossed state lines. It was the first time in my life I had ever been truly alone, and it was both terrifying and utterly intoxicating. I remember crossing the Texas state line, seeing the big "Welcome to Texas" sign, and pulling over to the side of the road. I just sat there in my car, the engine ticking, and I cried. Not sad tears, but tears of pure, unadulterated relief. I had made it. I was free. The apartment hunt was a humbling experience. I looked at dingy, grim places with the smell of stale cigarettes baked into the walls. I finally settled on a third-floor walk-up in a noisy building with decent sunlight and walls the color of weak tea. The landlord, a man named Mr. Henderson with a permanent scowl, handed me the keys with a grunt. The first night in that empty apartment was one of the longest of my life. The silence was a physical thing, pressing in on me from all sides. I ordered a pizza I couldn't eat and just sat on the floor, watching the headlights of passing cars paint stripes across the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a terrible, irreversible mistake. But then, I started my classes to become a teacher. And slowly, painstakingly, I began to build a life. In Dallas, I wasn't Beatrice's quiet sister. I was just Audrey. I was the girl who always had her notes in order, the one you could count on for a study group. I made a few friends, tentative connections at first, over textbooks and coffee. And when I started my student teaching, I found my purpose. The kids, with their messy, unfiltered honesty, didn't care if I was outgoing or popular. They cared that I was kind. They cared that I listened. They cared that I could show them the magic of turning letters on a page into stories in their heads. I'll never forget the first time one of my students, a shy little girl named Maria, wrote me a note that said, "You are the best teacher." I folded that piece of paper and kept it in my wallet for years. It was the first trophy I had ever earned. After graduation, I landed a full-time teaching job at a wonderful elementary school in a quiet Dallas suburb. Life settled into a gentle, predictable rhythm. It was a small life, a simple one, but it was mine. And then, Arthur came along and turned my small, simple life into something beautiful. I met him as Michael. I met him through a friend from work. She had been trying to set me up for months, and I had always politely declined. The idea of dating was terrifying. But she was persistent. He's a good man, Audrey. Quiet, like you. His name was Arthur, and he was a real estate agent. Our first date was at a little neighborhood Italian restaurant, the kind with checkered tablecloths and Chianti bottles as candle holders. I was so nervous, I knocked over my water glass within the first 5 minutes. I was mortified, but Arthur just laughed, a warm, easy sound, and helped me mop it up with a napkin. He had a way of making you feel at ease. He wasn't like the loud, brash men Beatrice always dated. He was calm, observant, and he had the kindest eyes I had ever seen. He had this quiet warmth that drew people in without demanding attention. I spent most of the dinner talking about my students, rambling on about lesson plans and playground drama. I was sure I was boring him to tears. But he never looked bored. He listened, truly listened, nodding and asking thoughtful questions. So, what book are you reading with them now? He'd ask, or what's the funniest thing a student said this week? Towards the end of the night, as we were waiting for the check, he looked at me across the table, his gaze so direct it made my heart flutter. You know, he said softly, you talk about those kids with so much love. It's really something special. He paused, then added, you're different, in a good way. The kind of different that stays with you. Those words were like water on parched earth. No one had ever called my quietness peaceful. They called it shy, withdrawn, antisocial. But Arthur saw it as a strength. He saw me. We dated for 2 years before getting married. Our courtship was as quiet and gentle as he was. We took long walks in the park, cooked dinner together, and spent hours just talking. He proposed on a rainy Tuesday night. We were in our small, cozy apartment, curled up on the couch, listening to the rain patter against the window. He hadn't made my favorite dinner or planned some grand gesture. He just turned to me, took my hand, and his eyes were full of a sincere, overwhelming love. Audrey, he began, his voice a little thick, I never knew a life could be this peaceful. I never knew I could be this happy. I don't want to spend a single day without this. Will you marry me? He pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring that was more beautiful to me than any flashy diamond Beatrice's boyfriends ever bought her. Tears streamed down my face as I said yes. They were happy tears, pure and simple. For the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly chosen. Our life together wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real and it was good. His steady job and my teacher's salary were enough to afford the down payment on a small but charming bungalow in a neighborhood with big oak trees. We spent our first year in that house making it our own. We painted the walls a soft yellow, planted a garden in the backyard, and scoured flea markets for furniture that had character. Arthur was surprisingly handy. I remember one Saturday we spent all day assembling a bookshelf, laughing as we kept putting the shelves in upside down. That bookshelf, crooked as it was, became my favorite piece of furniture. Our life was built on small, happy rituals. Saturday morning breakfasts at the Bluebonnet Diner, where the waitress, a woman named Flo, always called us lovebirds. Sunday afternoons spent reading side by side on the couch. We never had children. After a few years of trying, we accepted it wasn't meant to be, and we found contentment in our life together. Our home was quiet, filled with books, the smell of Arthur's coffee in the morning, and a deep, abiding sense of peace. Arthur was my biggest cheerleader. He believed in me more than I believed in myself. When I was offered a small promotion to lead teacher for my grade level, I was terrified of the extra responsibility. Arthur sat with me for hours, making lists of all the reasons I was qualified, telling me how proud he was. He made me feel capable. He made me feel strong. During those years, my contact with Beatrice was sporadic. She was a high-powered marketing executive in New York now, living a life that seemed a world away from mine. She'd call every few months, usually when she had something new to brag about. "Oh, Audrey, you wouldn't believe it," she'd say, her voice crackling with energy. "My firm just landed the Coca-Cola account. And my new boyfriend, he's a hedge fund manager, just whisked me away to Paris for the weekend." I'd listen, offering polite congratulations. That's wonderful, Beatrice. I'm so happy for you. Then I'd tell her about my new reading program for my first graders, or the tomatoes we were growing in our garden. I could almost hear her eyes glazing over through the phone line. Well, that's sweet, honey, she'd inevitably say, her tone a mixture of pity and condescension. As long as you're happy with your simple little life. The thing was, her words no longer had the power to hurt me. Because I was happy. I wasn't living a life that would make for a flashy magazine article, but it was a life rich with love and purpose. I had a man who cherished me for exactly who I was. I had a job that made a difference. I didn't need Paris or hedge fund managers. I had everything I had ever truly wanted right there in that little bungalow, with my kind, steady Arthur by my side. For 10 wonderful years, I believed our quiet, simple love was invincible. The change, when it came, was like the tide slowly going out, so gradually you don't notice the shoreline has moved until you look up and see acres of exposed, barren sand. It started around our 10th wedding anniversary. Arthur began working later. At first, it was just an hour or two. Big project at work, he'd say, giving me a tired kiss on the cheek before disappearing into his home office. But soon, he was coming home after I'd already eaten dinner, long after the sun had set. The smell of his coffee was no longer the first thing I noticed in the morning, because he was often gone before I even woke up. Our dinner table, once the hub of our day where we'd reconnect and share stories, grew quiet. I would try to fill the silence, talking about my students, but his responses became shorter, more distracted. He'd nod and murmur, "That's nice, honey," but his eyes would be distant, his mind clearly somewhere else. I remember one evening I was especially excited. I had finally gotten a shy, withdrawn student to read aloud in front of the class. It was a huge breakthrough. I couldn't wait to tell Arthur. I made his favorite meal, shepherd's pie, and waited. He didn't get home until almost 9. He walked in, dropped his briefcase by the door with a heavy thud, and loosened his tie. "Long day," he grunted, heading for the refrigerator. "I made your favorite," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Not hungry," he said, grabbing a beer and closing the door. He didn't even look at the table I had set. I stood there in the kitchen, the story about my student dying on my lips. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with things I didn't understand. The loving, attentive man I had married was being replaced by a ghost, a polite stranger who shared my house but not my life. I tried to talk to him, of course. Countless times. "Is everything okay at work, Arthur? You seem so stressed." "It's just work, Audrey. Don't worry about it." "Are we okay?" I asked one night, my voice small, as we lay in bed, a cold foot of distance between us. He just rolled over, his back to me. "We're fine. I'm just tired. Go to sleep." But we weren't fine. A cold dread, a feeling I hadn't experienced since my childhood, began to creep back into my life. It was the feeling of being invisible, of being a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. I felt like I was losing him, and I had no idea why. The night it all shattered was a Thursday. The air in our house was so thick with unspoken words it felt hard to breathe. Arthur had been a phantom all week, barely speaking to me. I had decided that night I would demand an answer. I couldn't live in this suffocating silence any longer. I cooked dinner, but neither of us ate much. I just pushed a piece of chicken around my plate, my stomach in knots. Finally, I put my fork down. The soft clink against the ceramic plate sounded like a thunderclap in the quiet room. "Arthur, we have to talk," I started, my voice trembling slightly. He finally looked up from his plate. He met my eyes, and for the first time in months, his gaze was clear, direct, and utterly cold. There was no warmth, no love, nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. "You're right," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "We do." He took a breath, and the next 4 words detonated my life. I want a divorce. The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed out of my lungs. I'm sure I said something, maybe his name, maybe a choked what, but I couldn't hear it over the roaring in my ears. It felt like a dream, a nightmare. This couldn't be happening. Not to us. Not to Arthur and me. Why? I finally managed to whisper, the words scraping my raw throat. What did I do? It's over, Audrey, he said, his voice like stone. He wouldn't give me a reason. He just repeated the words like a death sentence. I've made up my mind. Before I could process, before I could scream or plead or fall apart, the doorbell rang. A sharp, cheerful, two-note chime that was so grotesquely out of place it felt like a sound from another universe. I sat there, frozen, unable to move, as Arthur calmly stood up, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and walked to the front door. I heard the lock turn. I heard the door open. And then I heard the sound that would haunt my nightmares for months to come, the confident, triumphant click-clack of high heels on our hardwood floor. Beatrice strutted into our dining room. She was a vision in a sharp, expensive-looking red dress. Her hair was perfect, her makeup was perfect, and a wide, predatory smile was plastered across her face. She walked right up to Arthur, my husband, and tucked her arm into his as if she belonged there. He didn't pull away. He just stood there, a statue, his face a blank mask. Beatrice looked at me, her eyes sweeping over my simple clothes, my stunned, tear-streaked face. Her smile widened, a cruel, satisfied slash of red lipstick. Arthur and I are getting married, she announced, her voice dripping with a smug satisfaction that turned my stomach. The floor disappeared from under me. I gripped the edge of the dining table to keep from collapsing. My sister. My husband. The two central pillars of my life, conspiring together to destroy me. I looked from Beatrice's gleeful face to Arthur's empty one, searching for any sign that this was a sick joke, a terrible mistake. There was nothing. Then Beatrice spoke again, her voice like sweet poison, twisting the knife. It's no joke, Emily. You've always lived in my shadow. I think it's time you stayed there for good. The weeks that followed are a gray, foggy memory. It felt like I was watching my life happen to someone else, from a great distance. The process of the divorce was brutally efficient. Arthur wanted it done quickly, and I didn't have the will to fight. A thick manila envelope arrived by courier the very next day containing the divorce papers. His lawyer, a man with a cold, impersonal voice over the phone, explained the terms of the settlement. It was generous. He was giving me the majority of our savings, more than half. At the time, I thought it was guilt money. I signed everything he put in front of me, my hand moving like an automaton. I just wanted it to be over. The hardest part was leaving our home. Every object was a landmine of memory. Packing up my books, I found a faded receipt he'd used as a bookmark from our first anniversary dinner. In the closet, I found the old, soft sweatshirt of his I always wore on lazy Sundays. Each item was a fresh stab of betrayal. I hired movers because I couldn't bear to see Arthur again. I left the house key on the kitchen counter and walked out the door without looking back, leaving 10 years of my life behind. I found a small, soulless apartment in a large, anonymous complex across town. For the first month, the moving boxes remained an unopened fortress in my living room. I couldn't bring myself to unpack the remnants of a life that no longer existed. I called in sick to work, telling the principal I had the flu. The truth was, I couldn't face the sympathetic, questioning eyes of my colleagues, and I certainly couldn't face the innocent, happy faces of my students. Most days, I just sat on the couch, which was still wrapped in plastic from the movers, and stared at the beige wall. I didn't watch TV. I didn't read. I just sat. The phone would ring, friends from work like my dear friend Carol, calling to check in. I'd watch her name flash on the screen and let it go to voicemail. Audrey? Honey, it's Carol. Just calling to see how you are. We're all worried about you. Please call me back. I couldn't. What would I say? How do you explain a betrayal so profound it feels like it has hollowed you out from the inside? Meanwhile, Beatrice was putting on a victory parade. A friend, meaning well, sent me a screenshot from Beatrice's social media. It was a picture of her and Arthur, clinking champagne glasses on a balcony overlooking the ocean. The caption read, "Finally with my true soulmate." I threw up after I saw it. I deactivated all my accounts that day. I couldn't take it. Each smiling photo, each celebratory post, was a public testament to my failure, my erasure. I had been so easily and happily replaced. About a month into my self-imposed exile, I finally ran out of food and was forced to venture out to the grocery store. I must have looked a sight, pale, hair uncombed, wearing the same sweatpants I'd had on for 3 days. As I was fumbling with my keys to get back into my apartment building, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. My heart stopped. It was Beatrice's car. She got out, looking like she'd just stepped out of a magazine. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my rent, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sun. She saw me and her face broke into a bright, fake smile. "Audrey," she called out, her voice unnervingly bright and cheerful, as though she had done nothing wrong. "How have you been?" I just stood there, clutching my single bag of groceries, milk, bread, a can of soup. I felt small and pathetic under her polished gaze. "What do you want, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice raspy from disuse. She walked towards me, her heels clicking an arrogant rhythm on the pavement. She stopped a few feet away, her smile still perfectly in place. "I just wanted to check on you, silly," she said, her tone dripping with false concern. "This must be so hard for you. I want you to know, I'm here for you if you need anything." The audacity of it. The sheer, breathtaking nerve. It was so insulting, so deeply cruel, that it snapped something inside me. The fog of numb depression began to burn away, replaced by a hot, white-hot anger. "You're here for me?" I said, my voice low and shaking with a rage I didn't know I possessed. "You stand there, in your expensive suit, after you blew up my life, and you pretend to be worried?" Her smile tightened at the edges. "Now, Audrey, don't be dramatic." Dramatic? I almost laughed. It was a raw, ugly sound. "What matters, Beatrice, is that you betrayed me. You betrayed your own sister. You took my husband, my home, my life, and now you have the gall to stand here and offer me your pity? Get out. Get away from me." For the first time, her mask slipped entirely. The fake sympathy vanished, and her eyes turned to cold, hard chips of ice. The real Beatrice was finally on display. "Fine," she hissed, her voice dropping its sweet pretense. "Be a martyr. Wallow in your miserable little life. But don't you dare expect me to feel sorry for you." She took a step closer, her voice a venomous whisper. "You've always been weak, Audrey. You're fragile. That's why people leave you. That's why Arthur chose me. He wanted a strong woman, not a broken little bird." She turned on her heel and walked back to her car, leaving me standing there on the pavement, her words hanging in the air like poison gas. Weak. Fragile. The old insults, the old labels. But this time, they didn't make me want to cry. They made me want to fight. Beatrice's cruelty was the unlikely spark that ignited a fire in me. Lying on my couch, defeated, was precisely what she wanted. It was what my parents had always expected. It was the role I had been cast in my whole life. And in that moment, standing outside my sad little apartment, I decided I was done playing the part. The next Monday, I showered, put on my nicest work dress, and went back to school. Walking down the hallway felt like walking a tightrope. I could feel the stares, hear the whispers stop as I passed. My friend Carol rushed to my side, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "Audrey." "Oh, thank God. Are you okay?" I just gave her a small, tight smile. I will be, I said, and for the first time, I almost believed it. That week, I made the call. I found a therapist, a woman named Dr. Evans. My first session was one of the most difficult hours of my life. I sat on her plush couch, twisting a tissue in my hands, and for the first 20 minutes, I couldn't speak. Then, the dam broke. I told her everything. About being the shadow twin. About my parents. About Arthur's quiet love and his shocking betrayal. About Beatrice's triumphant smile. I cried until I had no tears left. Dr. Evans just listened patiently, and when I was done, she said something that stuck with me. Audrey, you've been carrying the weight of other people's definitions of you for a very long time. Perhaps it's time to write your own. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a start. I kept going back. We began the slow, painful work of untangling the knots of my past. One evening, I saw a flyer at the local library for a community book club. The old me, the weak, fragile Audrey, would have crumpled it up. But the new me, the one who was tired of being afraid, took a picture of it with my phone. The following Tuesday, I walked into that library meeting room. My heart was pounding. I sat in a chair in the corner, planning to just listen. The book was one I had loved, and as the other women started discussing it, I found myself disagreeing with one of their points. Before I could stop myself, I spoke up. I actually saw that character's motivation a little differently, I said, my voice barely a whisper. All eyes turned to me. I explained my point, expecting them to dismiss it. But instead, a woman across the table smiled. That's a really interesting take. I hadn't thought of it that way. It was a small thing. A tiny victory. But it felt monumental. I was making new friends. I was finding my voice. I was slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding myself, not on the foundation of Arthur's love or my family's approval, but on something new. Something that was entirely my own. 3 months passed. My life found a new, quiet rhythm. It was a fragile stability, but it was mine. I was teaching, going to therapy, attending my book club. I was starting to sleep through the night again. The pain was still there, a constant, dull ache in my chest, but it no longer consumed me. I was surviving. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, everything was upended once again. I was in my classroom after the final bell, tidying up, when my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number with a local area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello? May I speak with Ms. Audrey Carter? The voice was a man's, professional and somber. This is she, I said, a flicker of unease stirring in me. Ms. Carter, my name is David Allen. I'm an attorney with the firm Allen and Associates. I apologize for the unsolicited call. I'm calling you today regarding your ex-husband, Arthur Jensen. My blood ran cold. I sank into my desk chair. Why would Arthur's lawyer be calling me? Is everything all right? I asked, my voice suddenly tight. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of weighted silence that precedes terrible news. Ms. Carter, the lawyer said, his voice gentle but firm, I regret to inform you that Mr. Jensen passed away suddenly last night. The classroom around me seemed to warp and fade. The colorful posters on the wall blurred. Passed away? Arthur? It didn't make any sense. He was young, healthy. What? I breathed, the word a puff of air. How? What happened? A heart condition, I'm told, he explained. It was very sudden. I am very sorry for your loss. My mind was a chaotic storm of disbelief and confusion. Loss? He wasn't mine to lose anymore. But the news struck me with the force of a physical blow. Arthur was gone. Why are you calling me? I stammered. Mr. Jensen updated his will a few months ago, shortly after your divorce was finalized, Mr. Allen said. He left very specific instructions for me to contact you directly in the event of his death. There are some legal matters to discuss. But more importantly, he left a letter. A letter he wanted to make absolutely certain would get to you. A letter. For me. After all this time, after all the silence and cruelty, he had left me a letter. I see, I said, my voice a hollow echo of itself. When can I come in? We set a meeting for the next morning. I hung up the phone and just sat there in my empty classroom, the late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. Arthur was dead. And he had one last thing to say to me. The next morning felt surreal. The drive to the lawyer's office downtown was a blur. I remember the city traffic, the horns, the people rushing along the sidewalks, all of it feeling like it was part of a different world, a world that was still normal. The offices of Allen and Associates were on the 25th floor of a gleaming glass skyscraper. It was the kind of place that smelled of money and polished wood. I sat in a plush leather chair in the waiting room, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap my knuckles were white. I stared out the floor-to-ceiling window at the sprawling city below, feeling small and utterly terrified. What could he possibly have written to me? An apology? An explanation? A final, cruel twist of the knife? After what felt like an eternity, a kind-faced man in his late 60s with silver hair and a gentle demeanor came out to greet me. It was David Allen. Ms. Carter? Thank you for coming on such short notice, he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm and reassuring. He led me into his corner office. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. He gestured for me to sit in one of the two chairs opposite his large, tidy mahogany desk. Please, he said, sitting down himself. I know this is a difficult time. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. He shuffled a small stack of papers on his desk, the sound crackling in the otherwise silent room. As I mentioned, he began, his voice soft, Arthur made some very specific changes to his will. We can go over the legal and financial details of the inheritance shortly. But he was adamant about one thing above all else. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a single, plain white envelope. He slid it across the polished surface of the desk until it stopped directly in front of me. My name, Audrey, was written on the front. It was Arthur's handwriting. Neat, familiar, the same script that had filled the birthday cards and love notes he had given me for over a decade. He insisted that you receive this before anything else was discussed, Mr. Allen said. His final letter to you. Please, take all the time you need. I just stared at it. The envelope seemed to pulse with a life of its own. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The paper felt cool and heavy in my grasp. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. I was terrified of what was inside. But I knew I had to. I had to know. Slowly, with shaking fingers, I tore the seal and unfolded the single piece of paper within. The words were written in Arthur's familiar hand, though the letters seemed a bit shakier than I remembered. I took a deep, shuddering breath and began to read. Dear Emily, if you are reading this, it means my time has run out. There are 1,000 things I want to say, 1,000 apologies I owe you, but I don't have time for 1,000. I only have time for the truth. So I'll start with the most important thing. I am so sorry. I know what I've done seems monstrous, unforgivable. But I need you to believe me when I tell you that every cruel thing I did, every lie I told, I did it to protect you. I had to stop and read that line again. Protect me? My breath hitched in my throat. Protect me from what? I forced my blurring eyes to focus on the page again. 6 months ago, I went to the doctor for what I thought was just persistent heartburn. It wasn't. It was my heart. I was diagnosed with cardiomyopathy, a terminal condition. The doctors were blunt. They gave me a year, maybe less if I was unlucky. My world ended in that sterile little examination room. My first thought, my only thought, was of you. How could I leave you? How could I burden you with watching me get weaker and weaker? But then a more practical, more terrifying thought hit me: what would happen to you after I was gone? Especially with Beatrice in the picture. Around the same time, the lawyer for my late uncle's estate finally contacted me. Beatrice had been buzzing about this inheritance for months, ever since he passed. She imagined it was some vast fortune. At first, I hoped she was right, that it would be a blessing that could secure your future. But it was a curse. The estate wasn't a fortune, it was a trap. It was mired in over $2 million of hidden debt and liabilities. Beatrice, of course, didn't know that. She only heard the word estate and her greed took over. She saw it as her golden ticket. The paper crinkled in my tightening grip. A sob escaped my lips. And that's when I saw the only way out. A terrible, horrible way, but the only one I could think of to save you. I had to make her want the debt. I had to make her want me. I had to push you away, Audrey. I had to break your heart to save your future. It was the hardest, most vile thing I have ever done. Every cold word, every night I came home late, every time I saw the pain in your eyes and did nothing, it was like a knife in my own gut. The night I asked for the divorce, the night she stood there in our home. I have never felt such self-loathing. But I had to see it through. I needed her to be legally attached to me and to my cursed estate when I was gone. And I needed you to be legally, completely, free of it. I've left you my personal life insurance policy and my 401k. It's not a fortune, but it's clean. It's yours. It should be enough to help you start over, a real start, without her toxicity or her financial ruin anywhere near you. You deserve a life of peace, my Audrey. A life free from all of this. Please, try to forgive me. Please know that in my own broken, terrible way, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single second. Be strong, Audrey. You are so much stronger than you will ever know. With love, always. Arthur. I finished the letter and the world simply fell away. I couldn't breathe. A sound, a raw, wounded sound, tore from my throat. The letter fell from my nerveless fingers onto the desk. It was all a lie. The coldness, the affair, the betrayal, all of it was a desperate, tragic, selfless act of love. He hadn't left me. He had saved me. He had sacrificed his name, his honor, and my love for him just to protect me. I just sat there, in that silent office high above the city, and I wept. I wept for the man I had lost twice, once to a lie, and now, forever, to the truth. And right now, telling you this, sharing this impossible truth, I have to pause. It's still a wound that aches. It feels as raw today as it did in that office. If you're still listening, if you're still here with me, please, help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below. This lets me know you've given me a like, and it tells me that you're with me on this incredible, painful journey. Your support is a huge encouragement and truly, it cheers me on. Please, comment the number 1, and then listen as I tell you the rest of my story. I don't know how long I cried in Mr. Allen's office. He was a perfect gentleman, quietly pushing a box of tissues across the desk and leaving to get me a glass of water. When I had finally composed myself, he gently explained the legalities. Everything Arthur had written was true. The divorce settlement had been structured to give me all their liquid assets, while legally severing me from any of his future holdings or debts. The $2 million debt was now legally tied to his estate. And the sole beneficiary and fiancée, the woman who had publicly claimed him, was Beatrice. He had built her a beautiful, gilded cage, and she had flown right into it. The funeral was a few days later. I went, but I sat in the very back pew, hidden behind a large marble pillar. I saw Beatrice in the front row, dressed in a chic, expensive black dress, a delicate veil covering her face. She was the picture of the grieving fiancé. She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, leaning on the arm of one of her wealthy friends. She had no idea. She was mourning the man she thought had made her a multimillionaire, completely unaware that he had, in fact, just made her responsible for a mountain of debt. Watching her performance, I didn't feel anger or even sadness. For the first time in my life when it came to Beatrice, I felt nothing but a profound, empty pity. She had spent her entire life chasing shiny, impressive things, money, status, other people's husbands. And it had all led her to this, a front row seat at a lie. Arthur's letter had given me a strange, bittersweet gift. It had reframed my entire life. I wasn't the weak one who was left behind. I was the one who had been protected. I was the one who had been loved. The money from Arthur's life insurance and retirement fund, his real inheritance to me, appeared in my bank account a few weeks later. Staring at the number on the screen felt surreal. It wasn't a lottery win. It was the price of his heartbreak and mine. But I knew what I had to do with it. I had to honor his sacrifice. I had to live, and live well. My first act was to start house hunting. My little apartment had served its purpose as a bunker, but now I needed a home. I found a small bungalow on a quiet, tree-lined street, much like the one Arthur and I had shared, but this one was smaller, cozier. It had a big backyard perfect for a garden. I made an offer, and it was accepted. It was around that time that the calls from Beatrice began. The first one I missed. She left a clipped, annoyed voicemail. "Audrey, it's me. The estate lawyer is being very confusing. Call me back." I ignored it. A few days later, another call. Another voicemail, this one more strained. "Audrey, where are you? They're talking about creditors, about liens. This is ridiculous. Arthur was wealthy. Call me." Then the text started, a frantic barrage of them. "They say the estate is insolvent. This has to be some kind of mistake. You must know something." Finally, one afternoon, as I was packing boxes in my apartment for the move to my new house, an email from her arrived. The subject line was just my name, Audrey. The message was short. "We need to talk. Call me." I stared at the email for a long time. "I'm your sister." The phrase she had used my entire life to demand my compliance, my silence, my deference. The old Audrey would have felt a pang of guilt. The old Audrey would have called her back, tried to help, tried to fix it. But the old Audrey was gone. Arthur's final gift to me wasn't just the money, it was the truth. He had shown me, in the most painful way imaginable, who my sister really was. With a steady hand, I moved my cursor over the email. I dragged it to the trash icon. And then, I emptied the trash. The final cord was cut. Her chaos was her own. It had nothing to do with me anymore. It's been a year now since that day in the lawyer's office. I'm writing this from the sunroom of my new house. My garden is thriving. I have rows of tomatoes, zucchini, and more roses than I know what to do with. My hands are usually covered in dirt, and I've never been happier. I am still teaching. My students are still the brightest part of my day. I still go to my book club on Tuesdays, and the women there have become my family. My friend Carol comes over for dinner every Friday. We drink wine and talk for hours. My life is quiet. It's simple. And it is entirely, wonderfully mine. I am not the same woman I was before. The pain of the past has changed me. It carved new lines on my face, but it also carved new strength into my soul. I started doing things the old Audrey would have been terrified of. I joined a hiking group, and last month, I stood on top of a mountain and looked out at the world, feeling gloriously, breathtakingly small and powerful all at once. Arthur's letter stays with me, tucked away in a small wooden box in my closet. It's a reminder of the complexity of love and sacrifice, of the ways people can both hurt and heal us. And while I still wrestle with the pain of his betrayal, I also feel a deep gratitude for the chance he had given me to reclaim my life. I don't know what happened to Beatrice. After I cut off contact, I never heard from her again. I can only assume she is dealing with the consequences of her own choices. Sometimes, I wonder if she ever learned the truth. But most of the time, I don't think of her at all. For the first time in my life, I'm not looking over my shoulder at someone else's shadow. I'm facing forward, into the sun. And I feel something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. A quiet, steady, and resilient hope for the future. My future. A story where I am finally the one holding the pen. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my story. It means more than you know. If any part of this resonated with you, if you've ever felt like you were living in someone else's shadow, please share your thoughts below. Your kindness and your stories help us all feel a little less alone. Thank you for being here.